After those first few
were
weeks
some
of
of the
small
small
conversations
conversations
of my life,
I began
I
noticing
thought I
my
no
own
longer
very
denied
ordinary
truth.
life.
I was
drawn
drawn
to
extra attention
fresh
to
out
my
of
university
as a
before
mentor
leaving for
and
what as a
excited
man.
about
I
my
chose
very
every
first
conversation
made me
job.
look more professional.
The company where I was hired was
not
not very
Whenever
big,
I knew
but
there
it
was no
known for
weight
discipline
I rehearsed
and
my
promotions
points
more
more carefully.
Yet
I wanted to
knew
prove
the
myself
dangers
to impress the team.
he was
from
my
also
very
first day,
and
I
I
was
told
still
myself
building
my
my
career
career
about
the
professionalism.
whispers in the
But
office
the office
had
was
located
the
on the
truth,
10th
and I could
floor.
sense
I wanted
eyes
all
watching
watching
us
me
whenever we
every morning.
interacted.
One Monday
I
morning,
would
as I
ride the
entered
elevator
office,
with
I
people
arrived
I
at
saw
work.
him standing near the
holding their
anonymous
coffee cup
note on
his
my
desks.
desk.
His
It
eyes
always
lifted,
carried a
be careful
small
for a
notebook.
brief
People
moment,
are talking.
and
They
my
mocked with
determination.
mine.
My hands
I
shook
worked
as I
in the
folded
administrative
but
department,
it felt like
and
time
time
had
had
slowed
slowed
down.
down.
Reports,
He
and
smiled
supporting my
warningly,
team leader,
and
I smiled
the work
back
was
before
not
quickly
public
looking
sphere,
away. But I liked
my
later
heart was
that day. The
racing.
first time I
And I
saw my
asked
boss,
myself
my
how
colleagues
small
leaned
gesture
closer,
could
casually.
stir
He was
so
the head
much
of the
inside
department.
me.
People
A
are
man
later
in
that
his
late
late
30s. He called me
and
into his
had a
office
special
again.
bond.
Always wearing
This time,
perfectly
she
pressed
he
suits.
looked more
I
serious,
forced a laugh
with
and he leaned
confidence.
forward, but
He
my
had
hand
an
clasped
aura
on
of
his desk
authority.
and said,
That
the kind of
evening,
presence that made
after
people
everyone
lower
could
their
handle an
voices.
important
I decided to
client
confront him,
presentation
but he was
next
also
month.
known as
It will be a big
opportunity
and
for you.
encouraging.
He looked up from
I
my
was
first day.
surprised.
He walked up to my desk,
Still
but
here
there are
to
many
files
senior staff
and
yes,
smiled slightly.
I said
He
firmly.
interrupted,
You're new here,
I need
right?
to talk.
I've seen your dedication.
Yes,
He gestured
sir.
for me
You
to
can
sit.
handle
I
this
replied
better.
quickly.
My voice
Trembled
my
slightly.
voice
I trust
almost
you.
trembling. I gathered courage.
Don't be nervous,
warmed
sir.
me.
He
People
said
in the
kindly.
office are talking
work
about
hard,
us.
handling
Stay
focused,
focused,
and
they
they think
think
there's
not
something between
easy.
us. That simple sentence
Still,
stayed in
he
my
leaned
mind.
back
The way
in
he
his
looked
chair.
at me, not just what he
silent
said,
for a moment,
but the
his
way he
eyes.
said
Then
it, with a
gave me
calm
courage.
expression, he
I
said,
nodded,
and almost
and I'll do
personal.
my
What do you
best.
think?
I
I felt
shot
as if
as
he
I
had
prepared
spoken
something
directly
between
between
us.
us. He began
Not
the
just
room
as a
fell
boss, but
silent.
as someone who
Sometimes
cared
he
about
would sit
my
with me
Titans.
late in the evening.
I didn't know how to answer
and
details,
I said
finally
I
I
whispered,
whispered,
giving
I
suggestions.
learned the office
I don't know. Our
style.
conversation,
Made
whatever it
started
is,
drifting
it's
beyond
making me
work.
comfortable in my role.
He asked about my hobbies.
Something
Besides,
unusual
began to
I
happen.
never meant to
Even
put my
my
boss
boss
seemed to
had
notice
position.
me more than
found
I
myself
won't laughing
laughing
with him.
whenever there was
Forgetting
not
for a
just
moment
another
that his
employee
eyes
to me.
often searched
One
for
first
me in
day,
a room.
when the
You've
office
stood
was
out.
assigned
Not
tasks,
only
he looked
for
at
your
me
work
and
frequently
said,
chose
"Who
me,
you
even
are.
if there
You
were others
remind me of
intelligent,
myself when I was
at first
younger.
I thought it was
Ambitious,
because
you've made
I
me
worked
see
this
this
office
office
and ready to
I
take
submitted
on more.
reports
You've made
on
me feel
time.
that there's something
I
else about
double-checked
you.
my heart
Something that
thudded in
makes
my
you
chest.
stand
Rarely
out.
made
Hearing the
mistakes.
words,
I
I
froze,
naturally not
my
knowing
boss
how to
would
appreciate
respond.
that.
My
But
pulse
gradually,
quickened,
and
it
my
began
cheeks
to stir.
felt hot.
One
One
afternoon,
afternoon,
he
called me
just
into his
could
office
ruin
and went
every
back to
project.
discussing the
For me,
presentation.
his cabin was large,
but his
for our
words
reputation
echoed in
in
my
my
mind
mind
the
the
whole
whole
nodded
city.
slowly.
The lines
as I
I
sat
know
across from
from
him,
him.
that's why
And
I
he leaned
pushed
back
back
in his
feelings
chair,
was
but
slowly
feelings
and
have
asked
a
me
way of
questions.
showing
Soon,
themselves.
not
People
only
around
about
the
my
project
projects, but
started
also
noticing.
about my life.
Whenever
For the
he
first time
called me
into his
Aisha,
office,
I saw
you enjoy
vulnerability
working
in
here?
his whisper.
Yes,
Aside,
sir.
he
A
never
colleague
showed
once
that.
joked,
And
and
how's your
Aisha?
family?
At that moment,
they
I
live
realized
nearby.
he was not just my
Will
boss. I was
all get
surprised.
jealous.
Caught between
Bosses
duties. Usually
laugh.
didn't ask
Just
personal
me.
questions.
Felt a
The
sting
days
that
that followed
embarrassed
were
me.
harder.
I didn't want to be
I tried
the
to focus
subject
on
of
work.
I answered
But my
politely.
heart was
I
couldn't
listened
hide my mood
carefully.
either.
Every
Nodding
time my
with
younger
younger
sister
sister
teased
when I
every
left
time
the
you
room,
spoke my name.
my colleague
I
smiling
felt
at your
the weight
phone
of
for
voice
4 months.
unspoken.
I just
At
smiled
night,
and
I
said
lay
we were
awake,
discussing
quickly
work,
denied
torn
my
between
side
logic
inside.
and emotion.
I knew
The
exactly
pattern
who was
came the
occupying
turning
my
point.
thoughts.
Sometimes
Our
when he
company
left the day of
had
the presentation,
organized
he would
drew
stop
near.
and ask how my day was going.
Many
employees
he
started
worked
complimenting my
me
work
and
more
preparing
often,
slides
were
than
rehearsing
necessary.
speeches,
During
and
every day
report
of
Aisha. He
my
would
boss
side by
supported
side
me
throughout,
sharing
You
ideas,
always
one
pay
evening,
attention to
details,
details
and
and another long
clients.
discussion.
These
The
words
long
made me
hours
feel
and
proud.
shared
I don't know
responsibility
if I could
brought
do
us
this
closer
perfectly.
than
They created
ever.
a string
He looked
on the
directly
second
into
night
my eyes and
after a
said,
long
"Why
day.
did his
You
approval
can't
matter?
I stepped out onto
I
so
believe
much
in you
to
more than you
get some
believe. Why
fresh
did you
air.
feel nervous?
The city
His
lights
voice
sparkled
called my
low,
name.
and
One
air was
Friday
cool
filled
against
with
my
conviction.
skin.
When most employees
At that
had already
moment,
left,
I heard his
I was
voice
still in
wave
my wave of emotions. Finishing a report, it wasn't just encouragement. I heard his voice something deeper. Is he still here? I turned more relaxed than I had ever finally arrived over his arm. I stood in front of the client. Too many. I just wanted to finish this before we gradually gaining confidence. He smiled. I delivered every point with clarity, staring at the light. And by the end, you should also enjoy your life. We're visually impressed. I don't want to keep pretending. When I finished, there was a care about you. The only sound was the ticking of the wall. More than a boss already looked at me said softly. That's my breathtaking smile. Felt like my biggest reward and long was my boss after the meeting asking me about my team celebrated, and in his eyes saw honesty, just spending time with family. You were brilliant today. That's good, he said. His voice low. His family is important. This isn't right. I knew you would could lose. I sat frozen in my chair. My heart, my hands trembling. Thank you, sir. Sometimes it was doing what ordinary conversations means taking risks. But it felt extraordinary. I won't force you. From that day on, I guided back. I no longer deny it. For a moment, I couldn't words between
lingered
us.
in the
My
air.
heart
Maybe it was
was
heavier
my
than they
imagination.
should have been.
Part of me
Maybe
wanted
it was
to
surrender,
respect turning
to let
into
go of
admiration.
fear,
But there was
and
more
but
than
I
just
felt professional
admiration.
admiration.
His
Another
presence
part
warned
warned
me
me
of
of
the
the along with
consequences.
this
Words
realization,
lingered in my
finally
mind.
I feared.
And his
What if
smile
I don't
carried
carried
a
out
hidden meaning?
What if this
But
delicate
time
to
to
understand
understand
I was
will lead us.
confused.
More
He
importantly,
was my
nodded.
boss.
What if I was
As if there was a
misreading
line
everything
that should not be
and
crossed.
only
Take all the
embarrassing
people in the
myself?
office had
The
started
next week,
noticing
he
too.
asked me to stay
one
after
colleague
work,
teased
and we
one
went
after
into the
another
office
whispering.
whispering. Life
As we
went
sat
on
together,
but
something
the
between
office
us had
almost
changed.
soft corner
There
for
was
you.
no more
I
denial.
laughed it off.
Heavier
We knew
with
the
tears
truth.
passing
Even if we didn't announce
he
it to the
finally
world.
spoke. His
Was
tone
it softer
than
than me
usual
feel
this way?
Aisha,
Yet
do you
was
ever
it feel like
professional
some connections
connections
go
pass?
beyond the
Or
workplace?
was
I
there
continued
something
to
I looked
grow
at
in my
him
career.
every day.
He continued
I went
to
to the
held
office
mine.
with mixed
The whispers in the
emotions.
office
Excitement,
eventually died down.
nervousness,
but as
and
we
couldn't
couldn't
find
find
the
courage to
professional
speak.
on
Little
the
did I
surface.
know that this
Instead,
was
I
beneath the
lowered my
routine.
gaze.
The
There was a
story
ray
of my
of
life
my
was
own
about to
answer
take
would
a turn
reveal.
I never
Deep
expected.
before either of us
undeniable.
knew.
Once
Looking
the
back
office
now,
door opened,
I realized
colleague
life doesn't always follow the
choices.
rules.
Breaking
And
the
my
moment.
heart.
Sometimes
We both quickly
emotions
returned to
arrive
our work,
uninvited,
but inside,
and we must decide
my
whether to
world had
silence
shifted.
them or embrace
That
them.
night,
My
lying
boss
in
wanted
bed,
me, yes.
I stared
but
at the
beyond that,
ceiling,
he respected
my
me,
heart full of
believed in me,
questions.
and stood
Was
by
I
me.
falling in love
and
with
that
my
made
boss?
all the difference.
And if so,
our story
what
is
did it
not
mean for my
perfect,
future,
and
my
perhaps
reputation,
it
my
never will be.
dreams?
But
The
it
more
taught
I
me
tried to
something
resist,
valuable.
the
Love
deeper I
doesn't
seemed
always
to
come where
sink
you
into the
expect
pull
it.
of his presence.
Sometimes
Every
it
smile,
finds you in the most
every
unexpected
encouraging
places,
word,
like an
every
office,
lingering glance
behind
tied
piles
me
of
closer
files.
to him.
In the
I
quiet
knew a storm
glances
was
of
coming,
someone who believes
one
in
that
you
could
more than you
change
believe
everything.
in yourself. And that, more than anything else, is what makes this story mine. After
name
those
is
first
Aisha,
few weeks of
and
small
until a few
conversations,
years ago,
I began
I
noticing
thought I
my
had a
own
very
behavior
ordinary
changing.
life.
I
was
paid
24,
extra attention
fresh
to
out of
my
university
appearance
before leaving for
and
work.
excited about
I
my
chose
very
clothes
first
that
real
made me look
job.
more professional.
The company where
yet
I was hired
graceful.
was not very
Whenever
big,
I knew
but
there
it
was
was
a
known
meeting,
for discipline
I rehearsed
and
my points more
professionalism.
carefully.
I wanted to prove
not
myself,
just to impress the team,
and from the
but also
very
him.
first day,
I told myself it was
promised
just
I would
about
give my
professionalism.
best. But
The
deep
office
inside,
was
I knew the
located on the
truth.
10th floor.
I
of
wanted
a
his
tall
eyes to
glass
find me
building.
in the crowd.
Every morning,
One Monday morning,
I would ride
as I
the
entered the
elevator
office,
with people
I
in
saw
crisp
him
suits,
standing near the
holding their
entrance,
coffee cups
talking on
and
his
laptops.
phone.
His
I
eyes
always
lifted,
carried a small
and for a
notebook,
brief
a
moment,
pen,
they
and my
locked with
determination.
mine. It
I
was
worked
only
in
a
the
second,
administrative
but
department,
it felt like
handling
time had
schedules,
slowed
preparing
down.
reports,
He
and
smiled
supporting my
faintly,
team leader.
and I smiled
The work
back
was
before
not
quickly
glamorous,
looking away.
but I liked
My
it.
heart was racing.
The first time I
and
saw my
asked
boss,
myself
Mr.
why
Kamal,
such a
I
small
was
gesture
nervous.
could stir
He
so
was the head
much
of the
inside
department.
me.
A man
Later
in
that
his
week,
late 30s,
he called me into his
tall,
office again,
always wearing
this time,
perfectly pressed
he looked
suits
more serious,
and speaking with
He
confidence.
leaned forward.
He had
hands
an
clasped
aura
on his
of
desk,
authority
and said,
the kind of presence
"Aisha,
that made
I
people
want you
lower
to
their
handle
voices
an
when
important
he entered
client
the room.
presentation next
But he was
month.
also known for
It will
being
be a big
fair
opportunity
and
for you."
encouraging.
On
I
my
was
first day,
surprised.
he walked up to
sir?
my desk,
But there are
looked at my
many
files,
senior staff
and
members
smiled
who-
slightly.
He
"You're
interrupted.
new here, right?"
I've
he
seen
asked.
your dedication.
"Yes, sir.
You can handle
I
this
replied
better
quickly,
than most.
my voice
I trust
almost
you.
trembling. His
Don't be
words
nervous,
warmed me,
he said
but
kindly.
they also scared
Work
me.
hard,
Handling
stay
such
focused, and you'll do
responsibility
fine.
was not easy.
That simple sentence
Still,
stayed in my mind.
The way he looked
It was
at
not
me,
just what he
with
said,
confidence
but
in
the
his
way he
eyes,
said it,
gave
calm,
me courage.
reassuring,
nodded.
and almost
I'll do
personal.
my best.
I felt as if
As
he
I
had
prepared
spoken
for the
directly
project,
to me.
he began
Not
meeting
just
me
as a
more
boss,
often,
but as someone who
Sometimes
cared about
he
my
would sit with me
confidence.
late in the evening,
Weeks passed,
going through
and
details,
I settled
guiding
into
me,
my
and
routine.
giving
I
suggestions.
learned the office systems,
Our
made
conversations
friends with
started
colleagues,
drifting
and
beyond
grew
work.
comfortable in my role.
He asked about my hobbies,
but something
my
unusual
favorite
began to
books,
happen.
and even
My
my
boss
childhood
seemed to
memories.
notice me more
I
than he
found
noticed
myself
others.
laughing with him
Whenever there was a
forgetting for a
meeting,
moment that he
his
was my
eyes
boss.
often searched
One
for me
evening,
in the room.
when the office
When
was
he
quiet,
assigned tasks,
he looked at
he
me
frequently
and said
chose
softly,
me even if there
"You
were others
remind me of
available.
myself when I
At
was
first,
younger.
I thought it was
ambitious,
because I worked
hardworking,
sincerely
and ready to
I
take
submitted
on the world.
reports on time.
But there's something
I
else about
double-checked
you,
my work,
something that
and
makes you
I
stand
rarely
out.
made mistakes.
I froze,
Naturally,
not
not knowing how to
appreciate
respond.
that.
My
But
pulse
gradually,
quickened, and
it
my
began
cheeks
to feel
felt
hot.
different. One
He didn't
afternoon,
continue,
he called me
just
into his
smiled
office
to
and
discuss
went
the
back to
project.
discussing the presentation.
His cabin was large,
but his
with
words
tall
echoed in
windows
my
that
mind
gave
the
a whole
view
night.
of the city.
The line
As I
between
sat across from
professional
him,
respect and
he leaned
personal
back in his
feelings
chair
was slowly
and
fading.
asked me questions.
Soon,
not
people
only
around
about the
the
project,
office
but
started
also
noticing.
about my life.
Whenever he
So,
called me into his
Aisha,
office,
do you enjoy
I
working
could
here?
sense whispers.
Yes, sir.
A colleague
I
once
said.
joked.
And how's your
Aisha,
family?
if
Do
surprises
they
you
live
one
nearby?
more time, we'll
I was
all
surprised.
get jealous.
Bosses
They
usually
laughed,
didn't ask personal
but
questions.
I felt a sting of
but
embarrassment.
He seemed
I didn't want to
genuinely
be the
interested.
subject of gossip.
I answered politely.
At home,
I
and he
couldn't
listened
hide my mood
carefully,
either.
nodding with
My
interest.
younger sister teased
When
me
I left
one
the
evening.
room,
My
you've been
colleagues
smiling
asked
at your
what had
phone
taken
for
so
5
long.
minutes.
I
Just
just smiled
smiled
and said we were
I
discussing
quickly
work,
denied
but
it,
inside,
but
I
inside,
was puzzled.
I knew
The pattern
exactly who was
continued.
occupying my thoughts.
Sometimes, when he
As
walked
the day
past
of the
my
presentation
desk, he would
drew
stop
near,
to ask how
the
my
pressure
day was going.
increased.
He started complimenting my work more often
slides than necessary.
Rehearsing speeches
Excellent
and checking
report,
data.
Aisha, he would
My
say.
boss supported me
Or,
throughout.
You always
One
pay
evening,
attention to
as
details.
we finished
I
another
appreciate
long
that.
discussion,
These
I
words
sighed
made me
and
feel
said,
proud.
I
But
don't
at the
know if
same
I can
time,
do this
They
perfectly.
created a strange
He looked directly
warmth
into
in
my
heart.
eyes and said,
Why did his
"You
approval
can.
matter
I
so
believe
much
in
to
you
me?
more than you believe
Why did
in
I
yourself."
feel nervous
His
whenever
voice
he
was
called my
calm,
name?
steady,
One Friday
and
evening,
filled with conviction.
when most employees
At that
had already
moment,
left,
I
I
felt
was still
a
at my
wave
desk,
of emotions.
finishing a report.
It wasn't just
I
encouragement.
heard his
It was
voice
something
behind
deeper,
me.
something
You're still
personal.
here? I turned to see him
presentation
standing
day
with his jacket
finally
slung
arrived.
over his arm.
I stood in front of the
sir.
clients.
I just wanted to
Nervous at
finish this
first,
before
but
the weekend.
gradually gaining confidence.
He smiled. I
That's
delivered
dedication.
every point with clarity.
But don't work too hard.
And by the end,
You should also
the
enjoy your
clients
life
were
outside
visibly
the
impressed.
office.
When I
There was
finished,
silence
there was
for a
applause.
moment.
The
I
only
glanced at
sound
him,
was the ticking of the
and
wall
he was
clock.
already looking
Then
at
he
me
said
with pride.
softly,
That
"Do you have any
single
plans
approving
this weekend?"
smile felt like
My
the
heart
biggest
skipped a
reward of
beat.
my career.
Was my boss
After the
actually
meeting,
asking me
as
about
the
my
team
weekend
celebrated,
plans?
he found
I
a chance
stammered,
to speak to me privately.
Just spending time
"You
with
were
family."
brilliant today, Aisha.
That's good,
he said,
his
nodding.
voice low
Family
and
is
sincere.
important.
I knew
When he
you would
left,
shine.
I sat
I
frozen in
smiled,
my chair,
my heart
my
fluttering.
hands trembling
Thank you,
slightly.
sir.
It
I
was
could
such
have
an
done it
ordinary
without your
conversation,
guidance, but it felt
He
extraordinary
hesitated for a
to me.
moment, then added,
From that day on,
"Maybe I guided you,
I could no
but the
longer deny
brilliance
it.
was yours."
There was something unusual
His words
between
lingered
us.
in the air.
Maybe it was
heavier
just my
than they should
imagination.
have been.
Maybe
I
it was
knew
just
then,
respect
with
turning
certainty,
into admiration,
that there was more
but
than
I
just
felt
drawn to
professional
him.
admiration
His
between
presence
us.
made me alert,
But along
his
with this
words
realization
lingered in my
came
mind,
fear,
and his
what if
smile
people
carried
found
a
out?
hidden meaning.
What if this
At
delicate
the same
connection
time,
ruined my career?
I was confused.
More importantly,
He was my boss.
What if I was
There was a
misreading
line that
everything
should not be
and
crossed.
only embarrassing
People in the
myself?
office had
The next
started
week,
noticing
he
too.
asked me to stay
One
after
colleague
work to
teased me one
finalize
afternoon,
another
whispering,
report. As we
"Aisha,
sat together,
it seems
the
sir
office
has a
almost
special
empty.
soft corner for you."
There was a silence
I laughed
that
it
grew
off,
heavier
but
with
inside,
each passing
my
second.
cheeks burned
He
with
finally
embarrassment.
spoke, his tone
Was it wrong
softer
for
than
me
you
to
to
feel this way?
Aisha, do you
Was
ever
it just
feel like
professional
some connections
appreciation?
go beyond the
Or
workplace?
was there something
I looked at
deeper?
him, my breath
Every
caught.
day, I
His
went to the
eyes held
office
mine,
with mixed
searching,
emotions,
waiting,
excitement,
my lips parted,
nervousness,
but I
and
couldn't
curiosity.
find the courage to speak.
Little did I know that
Instead,
this was
I
only
lowered
the
my
beginning.
gaze.
The story of
Afraid
my
of
life
what my
was
own
about to
answer
take a
would
turn
reveal.
I never expected.
Before either of
and
us
the
could
man who
continue,
was once
the
only my
office door
boss would
opened.
soon become the
A
center
colleague
of my
walked
thoughts,
in to
my
collect
choices,
something,
breaking
and
the
my
moment.
heart. We both quickly returned to our work, but inside, my world had shifted. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my heart full of questions. Was I falling in love with my boss? And if so, what did it mean for my future, my reputation, my dreams? The more I tried to resist, the deeper I seemed to sink into the pull of his presence. Every smile, every encouraging word, every lingering glance tied me closer to him. I knew a storm was coming, one that could change everything. My name is Aisha, and until a few years ago, I thought I had a very ordinary life. I was 24, fresh out of university, and excited about my very first real job. The company where I was hired was not very big, but it was known for discipline and professionalism. I wanted to prove myself, and from the very first day, I promised I would give my best. The office was located on the 10th floor of a tall glass building. Every morning, I would ride the elevator with people in crisp suits, holding their coffee cups and laptops. I always carried a small notebook, a pen, and my determination. I worked in the administrative department, handling schedules, preparing reports, and supporting my team leader. The work was not glamorous, but I liked it. The first time I saw my boss, Mr. Kamal, I was nervous. He was the head of the department, a man in his late 30s, tall, always wearing perfectly pressed suits and speaking with confidence. He had an aura of authority, the kind of presence that made people lower their voices when he entered the room. But he was also known for being fair and encouraging. On my first day, he walked up to my desk, looked at my files, and smiled slightly. "You're new here, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied quickly, my voice almost trembling. "Don't be nervous," he said kindly. "Work hard, stay focused, and you'll do fine." That simple sentence stayed in my mind. It was not just what he said, but the way he said it, calm, reassuring, and almost personal. I felt as if he had spoken directly to me, not just as a boss, but as someone who cared about my confidence. Weeks passed, and I settled into my routine. I learned the office systems, made friends with colleagues, and grew comfortable in my role. But something unusual began to happen. My boss seemed to notice me more than he noticed others.
Whenever there was a meeting, his eyes often searched for me in the room. When he assigned tasks, he frequently chose me even if there were others available. At first, I thought it was because I worked sincerely. I submitted reports on time, I double-checked my work, and I rarely made mistakes. Naturally, a boss would appreciate that. But gradually, it began to feel different. One afternoon, he called me into his office to discuss a project. His cabin was large, with tall windows that gave a view of the city. As I sat across from him, he leaned back in his chair and asked me questions, not only about the project but also about my life. "So, Aisha, do you enjoy working here?" "Yes, sir," I said. "And how's your family? Do they live nearby?" I was surprised. Bosses usually didn't ask personal questions, but he seemed genuinely interested. I answered politely, and he listened carefully, nodding with interest. When I left the room, my colleagues asked what had taken so long. I just smiled and said we were discussing work, but inside I was puzzled. The pattern continued. Sometimes, when he walked past my desk, he would stop to ask how my day was going. He started complimenting my work more often than necessary. "Excellent report, Aisha," he would say. Or, "You always pay attention to details, I appreciate that." These words made me feel proud, but at the same time, they created a strange warmth in my heart. Why did his approval matter so much to me? Why did I feel nervous whenever he called my name? One Friday evening, when most employees had already left, I was still at my desk, finishing a report. I heard his voice behind me. "You're still here?" I turned to see him standing with his jacket slung over his arm. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to finish this before the weekend." He smiled. "That's dedication. But don't work too hard. You should also enjoy your life outside the office." There was silence for a moment. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then he said softly, "Do you have any plans this weekend?" My heart skipped a beat. Was my boss actually asking me about my weekend plans? I stammered, just spending time with family." "That's good," he said, nodding. "Family is important." When he left, I sat frozen in my chair, my hands trembling slightly. It was such an ordinary conversation, but it felt extraordinary to me. From that day on, I could no longer deny it. There was something unusual between us. Maybe it was just my imagination, maybe it was just respect turning into admiration, but I felt drawn to him. His presence made me alert, his words lingered in my mind, and his smile carried a hidden meaning. At the same time, I was confused. He was my boss. There was a line that should not be crossed. People in the office had started noticing too. One colleague teased me one afternoon, whispering, "Aisha, it seems sir has a special soft corner for you." I laughed it off, but inside, my cheeks burned with embarrassment. Was it wrong for me to feel this way? Was it just professional appreciation, or was there something deeper? Every day, I went to the office with mixed emotions, excitement, nervousness, and curiosity. Little did I know that this was only the beginning. The story of my life was about to take a turn I never expected, and the man who was once only my boss would soon become the center of my thoughts, my choices, and my heart.